Welcome to Uninterrupted. This podcast was merely curated with one goal: to build a community, a familiar thread to connect with like-minded individuals. A community where one can find purpose, one that serves you that feeling of warmth, one where you feel you belong. Our episodes feature unfiltered, free-flowing, and candid conversations with women from different walks of life who've created an impact in their own fields. So gear up to be inspired. I'm your host Samriddhi Taneja, and this podcast has been presented by MirarByStyle.me. It is the world's first ever augmented reality technology platform that enables virtual try-ons in real time for brands in the retail industry. Today I'm in conversation with one of my favorite marketeers, Shreya Soni. She studied at Delhi University and then at Warwick. She worked as a senior consultant at EY in London and returned to Delhi in 2013. Today, she runs one of India's leading experiential marketing agencies called Delhi Secret Supper Club and also runs a foundation called Picturewala. She's curated beautiful immersive campaigns for brands from Bombay Sapphire to DLF Mall of India to Monkey 47 to Shantanu and Nikhil, and also for the city like Gin Express and my personal favorite, the Thali tradition. Shreya, welcome to Uninterrupted, and thank you for taking the time out and speaking with me.
Thanks, Sam. That's such a lovely introduction. Thank you.
Okay, so you've had a very interesting career trajectory from being a consultant to running a supper club, that too anonymously for 4 years, to now leading a 360-degree marketing agency. So I'm curious, what was it that led you to start a secret supper club in Delhi, that too back in 2013?
I wish I had a sexier answer for this question, and it's possibly one of the most asked questions. But honestly, the one word response to that is boredom. I moved back at a point where, I think the city had evolved and it kind of transformed in a way that from a cultural point of view, it was bursting at its seams. We'd never seen Delhi kind of have access to so many cultural mediums and formats as it did back then. And it was a city that I'd come back to, and I was, just really in love with the city I came back to. However, what I thought was painfully missing was just that quality of conversation. I think it was quite pocketed and it was residing within specific corners, sometimes even under the same roof. And I think the common complaint that you'd kind of end up hearing weekend on weekend would be, where are those like-minded, interesting people? And the common thing I would hear was, you'll have to go to Bombay for that. And I was like, what? So if you kind of hear more than 10 people say the same thing. And in my head, I was like, well, you're interesting. You kind of join and connect those dots, and just to understand that, the interesting, like-minded people exist. They only need that kind of safe screen, legitimate platform to connect and then kind of see if the magic unfolds. And I think just kind of taking proactive action on that deep-seated boredom is what gave birth to the Supper Club.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but experiences have always been at the core of DSSE. That's what makes DSSE DSSE. But currently, we're sort of experiencing a rebalancing of the way that the world functions. From how we talk to how we shop to how we sleep. Everything is sort of taking a 360 turn. And some brands have always had this, a first digital first and digital only approach, while some are looking to get started and explore this vast sort of digital horizon. So what has the transition been like for DSSE?
So I want to say, I think I'm going to kind of rewind and give you a little bit more context of how we started and what we are today. And maybe that will paint the broader kind of narrative of the what and the how and the when. See, when we started in 2013, I think one of the biggest hooks and the core kind of USPs of this social experiment, so to speak, was that it was being run anonymously. So neither party of that entire experience spectrum had an understanding of who was behind it. So neither the member or the guest nor the kind of location partners or brands attached to any of those experiences. I think because anonymity was such a crucial hook for this company for 4 years, it was essential that we kind of like build that very essential trust and faith with either side of that bridge of consumer and maker via doing it offline. The
Right.
fact that, there was already a veil of anonymity, it kind of like really puts you 2 steps back in that very important trust building exercise with whoever you're like aiming to communicate with. So, could we have done it online? 100%, but I see like greater stickiness, and there's this sense of romance and almost like deep-seated connection when you can kind of have the touch and feel experience
Of
of the
course.
same communication. So I
Right.
think why we kind of like were more offline centric and on ground and like the touch and feel centric for 4 years was solely because you were already kind of like tackling one big challenge, which was the anonymity. It was around like year 2 or maybe 3, I want to say, when we kind of realized that there's so many great stories to be told from the city that were emerging, right from like kind of like tastemakers, culture makers, artists, products, spaces. There was so much good content out there that why kind of restrict it down to one vertical of storytelling, which was kind of like our on ground social constructs where you allow people to meet the makers, etc. So I think at that point in time, we started dabbling with doing the same job, which was basically the objective of telling the good story, but on an online medium. So we started tapping into digital kind of platforms. We started started our own blog. And then there on, what happened was, I want to say like in the last 3.5 years, I think across the globe, and this is not India specific, but across the globe, across industry segment, I think just adding that online format or medium of storytelling has become fairly intrinsic to any product.
Right.
And I think kind of like in response to that, it was a fairly organic and fluid add-on almost to that core of, which was again like literally the same, right? The one core objective of this company is tell the good story. So whether you do it on ground, that allows like just that powerful hands-on kind of like version of it, or the amplification power of the online. Either way, you're kind of trying to tell the good story. So we kind of just added on the layer when we felt the time was right. And today, like you rightly said, it's a weird, funky year
Yeah.
where there's kind of like this heightened consumption of information, content, and also connection via online kind of platforms and mediums. So I guess a lot of our solutions kind of will naturally have to incorporate that. I don't think we'll ever be an online first kind of
Yeah.
agency. We will be a dual, and if not like an omni-channel kind of an agency, our strategy will always involve that, that multi-pronged online offline kind of like tango dance. Because I also just feel that there is great impact and power in brands to connect with their target audience in an offline fashion. So I guess you'll have to do that dual tango.
Yeah. Yeah, fair enough. No, I mean, like, even now, whatever I've seen on DSSE online, it's
Yeah.
still very personal. So I feel like, I mean, you guys have been true to like, what you stand for and what you believe in, because I feel like, even if it is anything that I see online, it still comes across as you're talking to me, like literally. So I feel like,
That's good.
yeah.
That's good feedback. That's really cool because I mean that's really part of the objective. That I mean, this. The online space is a crowded space, right? It's not a
Yeah.
fairly like kind of like restricted or a lonely or like an isolated platform at all.
Yeah.
It's a crowded one. It's a noisy one. It's a populated one. So I feel like I think till you don't kind of stick on to that 2 or 3 non-negotiable core values, and for us, one of it is personable experiences or that personalized storytelling.
Yeah.
I think we'll feel lost in our MO, and which is why like we try cling on quite dearly to that characteristic of like, can we keep it personal? Can we keep that form of communication fairly tailored?
Yeah, for sure. And like on the same lines, like even
Yeah.
when it comes to the digital sphere, brand positioning is what makes all the difference. Whether,
Yeah.
you're trying to achieve like that awareness or engagement or incremental business at the end of the day, right? And
Yeah.
exactly what you said for that, like storytelling is key. And,
Hmm.
with the given scenario, the only thing is it really cannot be your business as usual marketing. Like you have to be a little more sensitive about your storytelling.
For sure.
And like the thing is that like you guys already top the charts for nuanced and impeccably worded storytelling. So would you have like any tips for brands to better their sort of art of communication in this unprecedented scenario?
I mean, I'll be honest. I'm not sure we're like we even have managed to hit bullseye
Yeah.
with that kind of like that vision. I think it's a constant work in progress. Only because if your objective is to deliver authentic storytelling, it is always going to be work in progress. So when you ask me that, okay, cool, are there like kind of like key tips or broad guidelines of what brands should keep in mind when they're kind of like talking online, is also knowing that it's, I think what is important, that you kind of almost see your brand as a person. And that person will have a very unique, definitive personality, right? So your likes will evolve and your dislikes will also evolve over time. So I think it's good to be cognizant of the fact that your personal voice, which is your brand's personal voice, should never stay static. It is a human personality which is allowed to be flexible, which is allowed to have kind of like multiple kind of like edits and tweaks over the course of time. What you should be kind of like very, very firm about is kind of holding on to certain core values, and which should never exceed more than 3 to 5. So for example, if I could like explain how at least we do it at
For sure.
DSSE, is that I think we're cheeky in like our medium of communication, but we will never be disrespectful. And there's like a very fine, thin line between
Exactly.
cheeky and kind of sometimes even like, sarcastic. But that's something that we will never be. So our brand Bible kind of categorically states that if you can stay neutral to positive, that's the kind of like general tone of voice of any communication. It could be a client email, it could be an internal email within colleagues of a team, or it could be, what are you putting up on like a story which is going to disappear in 12 hours. So irrespective of medium, I think sometimes just having that consistency in tone, vocabulary, general kind of like design language of how you want to communicate, those are the core values you should stick up to quite tight. And
Yeah,
then
yeah.
around that, it's a more cohesive narrative that kind of should be weaving, the facts and the emotions that your brand hopes to evoke.
So know your hard knows 100%.
Yeah, I feel like sometimes the yes bucket can be quite fluid and flexible.
Yeah.
Like you should genuinely be quite open to experimenting and trying new formats and mediums, and don't be that static and rigid about it. But it's always good to have that anchor dropped, which has your kind of like at least 3 to 5 core values or non-negotiable stated.
Yeah, no, that's actually great advice for like anyone who's leading like marketing or brand for, to sort
Yeah,
of
and
like always have.
generally you should have fun. Like, I
Yeah.
think more often than not, we hear so many brands kind of like, during those kind of like onboarding or objective setting strategy meetings, I think brands are so overawed or intimidated by the process of, what should their comm strategy be. And I think that's because they're just so concerned with that image that they're hoping to project.
Yeah.
And sometimes you're just like, but if that's not coming naturally to you, then obviously that's not you.
It's always fun to sort of like at least experiment and like, dip
Yeah.
your toe in the water and find out like maybe something just really works. And I want to say like while we're at it, I want to say
Yeah.
like, longer form of narrative has been like your strength and, as
Yeah.
DSSC strength, because, I eagerly wait for your next content piece. For example, like one of my favorites used to be, how to be like a good housemate. I feel like it really helped me.
Yeah. I think we all needed that advice during lockdown.
I know it's everyone really needed it, but
Yeah.
like is this like a form of narrative that you would like suggest to brands to sort of experiment with, or no, just do your thing and like like find your own tune? Like, do you think brands should experiment with a longer form of narrative?
See, I mean, first of all, thank you. I think it's good to know that there's certain takers for my never-ending kind of emails and content, because
Always.
more often than not, I'm so conscious of the fact that I can't, kind of like really concise my thought articulation. So that's good to know. But in terms of like that strategy being employed for brands across the board, I would actually exercise or employ that with a fair degree of like healthy caution, because I'll tell you what, like I think explanatory journalism or building a longer form narrative, it's extremely important and it has an important role to play in brand building.
Right.
I think what happens is that via long form narrative, you present this opportunity for a slightly more holistic brand story to be presented to its target or potential kind of audience, which is super exciting, right? Because you're getting like one step closer to them. But I think what's happening is that in the process of it emerging or kind of being born out of the fear that like, like I think quality, in-depth communication is being eroded by this rise of super clickbaitish. It's almost like a digital media traffic race today. I think, unfortunately, right now, what we're kind of seeing, the flip of it is that it's also becoming a buzzword, which is why I say exercise with caution. I think it was the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic. I think his name is James Bennett. And he said, it's a really cool line. And he said that, it's almost like this fetishization of story length, which implies it's like a shortcut to respectability.
Right.
And the fact of the matter is that just because you're kind of employing that research and longer form communication strategy, it does not imply the same. So if you are a brand that has the inbuilt knack and comfort for packing in, research, punchy language, and can retain the interest and kind of like sticky visual of the reader, then yes, that long form content and that form of communication is going to work for you. But for certain brands, I feel, it's good to be punchy and and for example, like I know long form ish. I mean, we're kind of in the medium to long form, to be honest.
Right. Yeah.
New Yorker is like long form. Like they're the true custodians of that word. We're still in between. It works for brands like, or agencies like us, or content creators like us. Now we're known and we're established that 7 saal se these guys have been writing this way. They know how to do it, and they'll figure out a way to keep it interesting, fun, but also like jammed with information.
Yeah.
But if you look at a brand like, say, Zomato, in less than 7 words, they communicate the message so beautifully.
Exactly.
I haven't seen any of the ads, whether that's like kind of a print ad or like a hoarding or even their digital, their Instagram posts. In less than 7 words, they've kind of delivered the message really impactfully. And for me, that works. I didn't need a full paragraph there,
Right. It's super crisp. It's always super concise and like it's literally to the point. Yeah.
And though their kind of one line has painted the exact picture than my probably like 10 lines would have. So, would they benefit greatly if they swap to long form? Not at all. They're doing a great job at that punchy, really crisp, clean kind of like content strategy.
Right.
But
Right.
for us, I know now we're too kind of like, we're committed so deep that if we pivot, it's going to be a little bit of a sellout.
Yeah. Okay. So, in the business of creativity, like for
Yeah.
everyone ranging from like writers to advertisers, marketeers, artists, we have all
Yeah.
often, we've got doomed by this known devil of like a creative block. And,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's easier said than done, but the sooner we sort of accept it, the faster we
Yeah.
come to terms with the fact that we need a navigation strategy around it. What is
Hmm.
your personal
Hmm.
perception of this barrier? Do you even see this as a barrier? Would you say, like, this is your time off to sort of refresh and
Hmm.
recreate and all of that? And if you have any personal tricks to sort of move on from it?
So I have a really strange take on that creative block. Okay, so I think it's completely okay, and I find it sometimes helpful to
Yeah.
have that creative block. I think there's this almost like self-imposed weird pressure and crushing pressure on everyone to be like this limitless, endless, bottomless well of creativity or solutions. And I think it's humanly possible, right? Like, I feel like
Yeah.
even the most established kind of creative marketer or copywriter out there will kind of be honest hand to heart about it, that I mean, it's not an automated machine. And there's only this much kind of like personal references and incidents that you can keep tapping into. I think it's okay that it comes, and sometimes it comes at extremely unfortunate times, especially if you've been on a roll or if you're like
Yeah.
smack in the middle of an important project and out of nowhere you're kind of like slammed with a creative block. I think the first thing I like to do is at least be mindful and aware that it's happening. And I think the minute I'm slightly more cognizant and mindful that it is happening, that kind of awareness makes me clench not too tightly. Because in my head,
Yeah.
I'm like, the more I force myself to be creative, and then it's common sense, right?
Yeah.
You can't squeeze it out of your any fiber, your mind, your soul, your heart, nothing. So I think the minute like you're slightly more aware that it's happening, my trick is just like step away from the problem. If it isn't time sensitive, or if there is a way for you to kind of like clearly communicate it within your team, to your client, even to yourself, so that, timelines are kind of respected, I think it's sometimes good to move away from that kind of like challenge at hand. And I think what happens is that when you're constantly like grinding and hustling and you're conjuring up these, gems and nuggets of creativity, that pressure to deliver the next thing is basically counterproductive. So stepping away from the challenge for a little bit, sleep over it, in fact, like do anything else but that actual task in hand, it's helped me in the past. And like, again, like, I want to clarify that it's not like that one run or that one night sleep or, a one night's Netflix binge kind of is
Yeah. It's a
the
process.
trick. It could take, sometimes for me it's taken days. I think my longest creative block has been, a double digit set of days. And for me, I've kind of trained my brain to be comfortable and accept it. It's as simple as you allow that process of creativity and you allow that process of research and development. I allow that process of block within me. Because I know at some point, if you are creative or if you are a technical, person, whatever kind of hat you don,
Yeah.
at the end of it, you will get back to it. You will calibrate and you will get back to your kind of like form of operation.
That's fair enough. I mean, like, sometimes it's also personally like, it becomes really hard because it's also a lot of self-inflicted pressure for a lot of people where
For
you're
sure.
constantly like,
And that
I have to
almost
do it.
aggravates it.
Yeah.
I've just always stuck on to this piece of advice, whether that's anyone from within the team or if it's even a client. And similarly, I extend that same piece of advice to myself. I think you have to kind of like and you kind of have to offer flexibility to your mind. And I feel the more you clench it and the more kind of like, I think there are enough pressures in our kind of work life.
Yeah.
It's not like, it's a blank slate and it's all exciting and hunky dory and sunshine and flowers. So if it's already not that kind of an environment and that's not the general construct of your daily working day,
Yeah.
I think adding on more layers of kind of self-inflicted like pressure doesn't help anyone, and least of all your client.
Fair
And I feel
enough.
like your
Yeah.
biggest responsibility usually is towards your client and your customer, and of course to yourself and your team. But I think the more you kind of like try really squeeze it out, that creative block almost gets bigger and bigger.
Yeah. That interestingly, that like leads me to my very next question, where I
Cool.
just want to understand: does
Yeah.
Delhi Secret Supper Club have like a secret motivational mantra that's working for your team right now? I feel like all of us could literally like imbibe some sort of motivation from everywhere that we can like get it from.
Yeah, no, for sure. I feel like I am constantly feeding off different energies and different people and things I'm reading, things I'm consuming, seeing. So yeah, I like that share of energy and that exchange of energy. It keeps everyone going. I think I haven't really placed too much thought to it, but what I will admit to is I think my personal ways of working, something that I have observed in the last kind of like decade or so, is that I personally seek a lot of kind of purpose in movement. So I feel like, if like the one thing that was fairly clear to me, not just kind of March 2020 when COVID kind of became like, a universal, extremely important challenge that we need to address, but even in every other kind of like significant like dip or kind of hurdle or some kind of a roadblock personally and professionally. But I just feel that like, what is your singular objective? And you have to go back to that. So I think pre-COVID, the singular objective of DSSC, actually dual objective, was one, you got to keep saying and sharing that good story.
Yeah.
And secondly was to kind of innovate on behalf of your clients. Should that change because of, pandemic? I never thought I'd ever say those words, but should that change during a pandemic? Should that change during a recession? Should that change because you're lacking motivation? Should that change because you have your creative block? Personally, I don't think so. I think as a team, you kind of like the days where you notice that person A is dipping, just that open, honest communication so that person B, C, D, E, F can kind of like pick it up. And as and when A is back, on the roster, then, that constant exchange of energy towards working, towards that big common objective and goal. I think that's what's really kept us going. I mean, we went into remote working, like a week before it was officially, and we were like, the city was in lockdown mode. And like, I want to say overnight, this isn't something you kind of preempt. I mean, now I think it's always going to be something we factor in.
Yeah.
But overnight, I mean, systems, processes, ways of working, were kind of
Everything's
built.
changed. Yeah.
And like, forget like, just kind of everyone else in the team. I feel like, I think my first 100 days of like this lockdown and this new way of working involved a lot of unlearning, relearning, on the job training. How do you because it became a process of over communicating and keeping a set of other people superbly motivated and engaged, even though you can't physically be, under the same roof. So I think there were so many learnings, but I think that one kind of like personal mantra or like my personal MO of working, which is I find purpose in movement. That's the one thing that really kind of set the tone for the last 5-6 months, I think. And which is why we've been just kind of like marching along, I don't know how much of it works, but we just kept moving.
Okay, so another very I won't say this is interesting, but like I got some insights from like this recent survey that I was seeing, and this
Hmm.
was a survey that like a lot of marketeers participated in, out of which
Hmm.
45% reported that a campaign launch had been delayed. 34% actually said that they had to alter an ad creative, and 26% had already cancelled like a media buy. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, this is also like another advice question, where you
Hmm.
know, even though digital is the future, it's almost the present as well. But marketing budgets have still fairly remained scrunched down. So, do you have any piece of advice for like all marketeers to sort of carefully distribute or redistribute their spends so that like there is some sort of return on investment?
So, I think typically speaking, it's great to have, phrases like return of investment
Hmm.
in kind of like campaign management.
Yeah.
Typically speaking,
Hmm.
absolutely. I feel like a lot of those metrics need readjustment this year, and I want to
Hmm.
say big parts of next year. This, very unique combination of a recession and a pandemic. This is
Hmm.
not something that's going to get fixed with the first access to a vaccine. The
Right.
truth of the matter is that I feel the more we kind of hopefully pin and pine for that vaccine to come out, I think that's probably a very blinkered approach
Yeah.
to how you want to execute and how you want to really conduct your business. I think we have to kind of almost build ways and processes and formats that incorporates those two unique characteristics of today's marketplace. I think with that in mind, things like and phrases like your return of investment and media buying, etc., it will need severe readjustment. The
Readjustment.
expectation management has to change. So I think, like, are you hoping for advice from like a brand's perspective or a marketer's perspective? And then I'll tweak my advice.
Brand's perspective.
I think from a brand's perspective, I think there needs to be greater clarity, objectivity, and lesser kind of like emotional bias to seep in. So I keep saying that, like, a big part of my storytelling is kind of relies on personal memories and emotions and nostalgia and all of that, and I pick from that. But I think today this decision from a brand's POV has to be completely objective and stripped from much emotion. And I think one good way of doing that is kind of like relying on factual data. So good time now for companies and brands, irrespective of segment, genre, maturity level, to kind of like sit down with their books and figure out a backward calculation of what is going to keep the brand going for, say, 12 to 18 months. And then
Right.
from that, I think it's going to clearly emerge one, what's your kind of propensity to spend? And secondly, what's going to emerge is that typically brands have a lot of flying objectives. Even like I want to say what objectives were relevant in, say, Jan or Feb 2020.
Hmm.
I want to say 85% of those brand objectives today hold no relevance, only
Right.
because the environment has changed, the complexity of the challenge has changed, and a lot of internal and external factors are not going to allow you kind of smash that objective out. So I think it's important that a revision of objectives to know more than what are your top three objectives should emerge from that. And basis those three objectives, plus that information about what is the propensity to spend, I think jamming those two really crucial pieces of information should guide what you should be investing, and thereby also these renewed metrics. I mean, I think today brands should be allocating money towards seeing if their work is adding value to a
Hmm.
very fractured ecosystem and a marketplace. Is it really kind of like making significant value in the lives of their consumers, new and existing? And also, like, is this also building goodwill between, amongst your peers and your consumers? I think it would be quite narrow minded for any brand today to be working off similar metrics that beautifully worked for them last year. So I wouldn't really pay mad attention to things like traction and engagement and, return, even though I am fully aware, and it's a question that I'm being asked even more so today, because when you already have lesser cash to spend, then you definitely want a bigger bang for your buck today. But I think the challenge is you have to really adopt a different lens and view on that topic.
Completely agree. Like, you can't have the same metrics.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a time and place and value for those metrics too. I'm just not sure if right now is the time to kind of like employ and exercise those metrics.
Fair enough. Okay. Shreya, thank you so much. This conversation was really insightful, and I'm sure like everyone who's tuning is only going to look at it from like an investment point of view. But before we wrap up,
so
I have I have one more really interesting segment for you. So for everyone who's tuning in, so this is called High Five, and it's like a quick rapid fire round. And this is for listeners to get to know you more up close and personal. Okay, so the first question is, if you could host one DSSC on-ground experience tomorrow, which one would it be?
The Thali tradition.
Okay, same answer, same page. Great, do it.
It's so dear to all our hearts. And when I say all, I mean, just kind of people who've been our guests, our loyal guests, anyone who's worked on this project in the last 2 years. So yeah. I'm excited.
I mean, for everyone else who doesn't know what the Thali tradition is, you need to head to dssc.co or @DSSC on Instagram and check it out. I promise you will not regret it. Okay, so my next question is, this is going to be a really tough one, but if you were to star in like one Netflix series right now, which one would it be?
Oh my God, Sam, that's really tough. Anything that has like a really dark, morbid, edgy vibe to it. It needs to have a couple of like murders involved.
Now I'm worried.
I'm 100% going to be on like the detective kind of team of that show to try crack the case, obviously. And the general kind of like tone of that show should be super grey, dark, edgy, really needs to mess with your mind. So I want to say like those kind of shows really appeal to me.
To be honest, you run a company called Delhi Secret Supper Club. I feel like really well. Okay, my next question is, what are your top 3 takeaways from spending so much time at home?
Well, I want to say, one, I didn't know that we have so many comfortable couches and chairs at home. This is the first time, I think, since the age of 18 that I've spent this much time at home. So that's been insanely amazing. The second thing I think that has been a helpful realization is for me to learn. I never even had that kind of realization or skill in me. But for me to learn and practice and start employing the pause personally or even professionally. So that's been really great. And the third has been, it's really sappy and it's like a sob fest kind of a realization. But the third has been kind of like really being very tangibly and explicitly aware of how grateful I am for certain people and certain things in my life. And I think those have been like the 3 really kind of like, I mean, so vivid kind of realization for me in the last 5 months, something that I think we all are aware of in our, annual day-to-day or whatever monthly ways of working. But I think I've been a lot, like there's been a heightened realization of these 3 things this year.
Fair enough. Okay, what's your top work mantra, or like is there like a number 1 business principle that you operate with?
Which is the 80-20 principle. I think I have a little bit of a niggle of trying to get things right to the very last detail. And then basically I've started employing, like over the last kind of 10-15 years, I've started employing the 80-20 technique, which is aim for 100, but allow for 20% flexibility that it's not going to happen. And derive great joy with even 80% of the realization and the execution of a plan.
Yeah, I feel like it's so important for everyone to realize that. And also,
Yeah.
like, I feel like, I mean, failures are not really failures all the time. Like, great
Yeah, and it's
learnings
not a bad
always come out
thing.
of it.
For sure,
Yeah.
for sure, for sure.
Oh.
That 20 actually has more nourishing power than the 80 sometimes, you know?
Yeah, I get what you're saying. Okay, what are the 3 accounts on Instagram that you've been surfing through in the last 1 month?
Dogs of Instagram, cute dog videos, and DSSE.
Thank you so much again, and I hope to see you very, very soon.
I can't wait to see you. Thank you, Sam. This is great fun.
Thank you. Bye. For everyone who tuned in today, thank you so much for taking the time out and listening to our conversation. If this conversation struck a chord with you, don't forget to subscribe to our podcast and share this with your friends and family. If you have a take on the topic we discussed, or if you'd like to share some feedback, please feel free to write to me. I'm going to catch you next week with yet another uninterrupted conversation. Have a great evening ahead.